morning is two readings, both from Genesis. The first is chapter 18, verses 1 through 15. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great tree of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried over to the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered. "Do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 seahs of the finest flour, and knead it and bake some bread." Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to his servant, who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now, Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself and thought, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child, now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did." Second reading is from chapter 21, verses 1 through 7, entitled "The Birth of Isaac." Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse the children? Now I have borne him a son in his old age."
So I'm going to put some questions to you to begin. What has unraveled in this story that Dennis just read about Abraham and Sarah? What is unraveling? What is broken? What have they been dealing with for years and years and years and years?
No children.
No children. Lost hopes. Extreme disappointment. And in this culture, to be infertile or to be barren was an extremely shameful experience. And they would have been pitied and probably whispered about and pointed to as that couple that never had children. You know, in our culture today, people choose not to have children, or people choose not to marry. And it's not that big of a deal as it would have been in this time when Abraham and Sarah, in their time, in their culture, where having children was everything. For decades, they were considered deficient. They were considered inadequate. They were considered not good enough. They had lived with the shame and the stigma of not having had a child. And so maybe when birds, maybe she was able to come to some peace or be able to just let go of the hope that seemed to always fail to deliver for her, to get answered for her. Maybe now she and Abraham could live their lives knowing that it wouldn't be too much longer until they would die. They had lived a very long life. And maybe they could let go of the anger, the disappointment, the hurt, and the bitterness. When, in 1991, I had been married 10 years, and I made the very difficult decision to end my marriage. And it took me 2 years with a very good counselor to actually carry out that decision. That's how painful it was. For reasons that Sarah and Abraham might have experienced, I felt very ashamed. I felt like I was a disappointment to my family and friends. I felt fear. I was afraid of what people would say, especially my parents, when I told them. And so for 2 years, I worked on all of those issues, and then in 1993, my marriage of 12 years ended. And for 8 years, I remained single, and in that 8th year of being single, which was I was disappointed. I was hurting. I was missing having, a life partner, someone in my life who loved me and I could love and to do things with. And in that 8th year, I bought a house because I thought, this, where I'm living now, which was in Iowa, this is my community, this is my family. I had very dear friends in the church I belonged to, and I thought, this is the way it's going to be, and I'm going to let go of that, continual desire to find my life partner and accept my circumstances. And God laughed right then, because a month after I bought my house, I met Rick, my husband. And we lived in different parts of Iowa, and we continued to do that for a year, and we got married a year later, and I had found my life partner and just had unexpected joy and love and hope in our marriage together. So I kind of get what Sarah and Abraham were feeling. I can relate to it, as much as it's possible for me out of my own story. When you hope for something and it doesn't happen, and you continually feel the disappointment and the hurt and the grief, when sometimes you feel angry with God or bitter, and you say, why, God? Why do I have to deal with this? And then God, for Sarah and Abraham, God changed everything. They were told they were going to be parents at age 90 and 100. They were born again. They were transformed. Life was never the same. And that story about that blessing and that promise from God that they would be parents, and they would be parents of many people in many nations, that is a story that we tell over and over and over to our children in Sunday school, in our faith communities. It's in the Bible, and we read it again and again and again, because it is a story that things can be very hard and very disappointing for a very long time. don't lose hope, because in our faith, God is there. And maybe not as soon as we want something to change or be transformed, maybe not in the way that we hope something will be transformed. But God is with us, and God promises to always be with us. Well, at the end of the story, Abraham laughed and Sarah laughed, and I kind of have a feeling that God laughed too. I can imagine God laughing. And I can imagine them feeling like they're sharing a joke, What do you think? When we tell everybody in the neighborhood that we're having a baby, oh my gosh, who would have ever believed this could happen? Sometimes we laugh when we're dealing with really hard things as a way of covering up our feelings, our disappointment. Sometimes we laugh, otherwise we couldn't stop crying. But maybe sometimes we laugh in the midst of very difficult times because we don't have to have it all figured out. And a lot of times we don't have those difficult things and times figured out. And we know that in the midst of that, God is with us. That we don't know what God has in store for us or how God will help us in our healing in whatever we are dealing with. And maybe by telling this story again and again, the story of Abraham and Sarah, telling ourselves the story and reminding other people of the story, it helps us remember God's everlasting promise of presence with us always. God's presence, God's love, God's mercy, God's grace is always with us. This story of Abraham and Sarah becomes our personal story of God's faithfulness in the midst of what can feel very painful, horrific, disappointing, more than we can bear, those moments. And it's up to us, and we are called to continually pay attention to God's voice, to remember this promise, and to come back to God and ask God for God's help in renewing that promise, in remembering what God has promised for us to be with us. We don't have to worry that God's promise is going to go away. God's promises hold. But we have to pay attention to the relationship we have with God so that we don't lose sight of that promise and what it means. Amen.